On today's Locked On NHL, we look at which teams have changed the most this offseason for better or worse. Plus, our women's hockey spotlight takes a look at clues to the new league from recent hires and more.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to Locked On NHL for August 11th. I am Rachel Donner from Locked On Flyers. I'm here with a different face this week, Jay Forster from Locked On Columbus Blue Jackets, who you might have seen on yesterday's show around here. Thanks for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. You can subscribe or follow for free over on YouTube or on the SiriusXM app, anywhere you listen to podcasts to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Jay, how are we doing this Friday?
I am doing okay. I am very glad it is Friday.
Yes, I think so. We are slowly creeping toward the end of this off season, and we'll start talking about training camps and such soon. But I think for now, especially given that the Erik Karlsson situation is resolved, I feel like teams are now pretty settled in who they are and what they're going to be going into next season. So we thought we'd take a look at some of the teams that made the biggest changes this offseason and whether that changed their teams for better or worse. We're going to talk about it, but it also remains to be seen. I think one of the things that is really important to look at is making a big splash versus the right splash, right, Jay?
Yeah, for sure. There's making moves just to make moves, and then there's making moves to make the team better or because it's like the right time, And I think, speaking as someone who covers the Columbus Blue Jackets, I think there's definitely a shade of making moves just to make moves in this offseason. But there are definitely teams out there that have done it much bigger than the Blue Jackets.
Yeah, I think also sometimes you're forced into making big changes to your team through circumstance or because of injury or things like that. And, sometimes the results are good and sometimes they aren't. Sometimes there's just sort of a changing of the guard, so to speak, with your teams. And I think, one of the biggest cases of that this offseason has been the Boston Bruins. And I think there's a lot of kind of aftershock of what happened to them in the playoffs here that nobody really expected them to flame out that quickly. And I think it affected them tremendously. And then this off season, trying to figure out, well, how do we fix this? Then, Bergeron and Krejci retires. That just adds to the pile, right?
Yeah, for sure. Boston was such an interesting team last season because if I remember rightly, they were missing both Marchand and Bergeron at the beginning of the season. And everyone's like, oh, this is going to be tough for the Bruins. And so it wasn't like sometimes sometimes teams go into a season and it's like their last hurrah or whatever. And that this is probably the last shot that this team will have before they have to blow it up for cap reasons. That wasn't like that for the Bruins. They went into last season like, yeah, we'll see what happens. And they just so happened to have the best regular season in NHL history, just casually,
Sure, as you do.
And so it wasn't even like I don't think it was viewed as this is the last chance this team has. And then you look at it and you're like, oh, well, Bergeron's gone, Krejci's gone. They traded Taylor Hall. I believe Nick Foligno went in that trade as well. He was expiring UFA. Tyler Bertuzzi went to the Leafs. Dmitry Orlov went to the Hurricanes. Like, they are going to be a very different team on opening night than they were on the last night of the playoffs. Obviously, they've still got David Pastrnak making $1 bajillion, but it's going to be interesting with the Bruins this season.
Yeah, it really is. And you think about some of the trade deadline acquisitions that they'd gotten over the past couple of years, those are primarily who left, right? And so like they got rentals, but they did not keep those rentals for any significant amount of time. Garnet Hathaway also just signed with the Flyers for some ungodly reason. And then in terms of who they added, well, they got Lucic back, but that's sort of a fan favorite thing. How much is he going to contribute remains to be seen. I think, picking up Kevin Shattenkirk, Morgan Geekie, I think is a good start. They picked up JVR as well, and Patrick Brown for depth at center. But I just think it is going to be a very different team. And obviously, I mean, I can't say obviously because you don't know till you play the games, but it just feels like a team that is not going to be remotely close to the point total they had last year.
No, they'll be fine. I think they're not going to be a lottery team because I think David Pastrnak and they've still got Charlie McAvoy. They still have pieces. It's not like they're going to be the Chicago Blackhawks of last season where they traded everything with a pulse away. But I think it's probably going to be a bit of a culture shock for Bruins fans who have maybe not seen a Bruins team, that haven't seen a Bruins team without Bergeron or Krejci for 18 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Another team that made a bunch of changes this offseason, like smaller in number but bigger in terms of impact, I would say, is Nashville, right?
Yeah, for sure. So Nashville traded away Ryan Johansson, I believe retaining 50% of his salary. They bought out Matt Duchene, who went to Dallas on a very nice deal. And then they picked up Ryan O'Reilly to replace both of those guys, which Barry Trotz is making some big swings as his first GM. And I kind of respect it, honestly. Nashville had to do something. They weren't bad. They were just kind of, they've been stuck in like mediocrity, I guess, for the past few seasons, and I think it was very much a case of, well, something's got to give, something's got to change. They've got one of the best goalies in the league, and it's kind of getting to the point of like, well, do you build the team around Saros or do you get rid of him and look to the future? And they've decided that they're going to build around him. I think they've still got Roman Josi on the back end. They've got a lot of good young pieces. But yeah, that the moving out of Johansson and Duchene really shocked me. And then they've picked up some good pieces as well. They picked up Gus Nyquist, who I like a lot. He's going to be a good veteran. It's going to be an interesting season in Nashville, I think.
Yeah, especially with Andrew Burnett behind the bench. I think it was a very interesting hire by Barry Trotz, who's a different style coach than Trotz is, which you might not have expected.
They are polar opposites, I feel like.
Yeah, so that was really interesting that he made that hire in and of itself. So that should have an effect on the team as well. I would say another team that made some significant changes, but I feel like they had to because this was the year they have to take a significant step forward, is the Detroit Red Wings. I think that, we're in year 5 of the Yzer plan, right? And I feel like expectations are now that, okay, like you've had your time to put, chess pieces on the board in the right places, but now we actually have to win a ton of games, right? And so they kind of jettisoned a little bit of superfluous. I think Zadina walking away was the big thing in terms of guys on the way out, but they made a huge splash with getting DeBrincat, I think, which was important in terms of solidifying their forwards. But they also picked up some other supporting pieces as well with Daniel Sprong, JT Compher. Picking up Shane Gostisbehere on the blue line, I think, was really a good move as well. Great puck moving defenseman. Obviously, you got to make sure he's covered defensively because he's not that great at that. But I would say that, they really are starting to put the pieces around the core that they already had.
Yeah, 100%. This is a team that should be taking a big step forward. And you've kind of seen they've taken small steps forward. They've drafted decently well. Obviously, the arrival of guys like Seider and Raymond have been big boons for this team. If everything goes right, this could be a playoff team. I don't think it will be because it's based on a lot of things going right for them and a lot of things going wrong for other teams. But this should be a better team than they were last season. But yeah, I agree. This is definitely a team that is making moves, not necessarily just to make moves, because I think that, they didn't go out and they didn't trade for Erik Karlsson, for example, which I'm sure we're going to talk about in just a second. But they've made some big swings, and I think it's going to be a case of if they're not competitive this season, I think the fans are the fans are going to get restless about the Yzer plan.
I think so too. So it's a big year in Detroit. In the meantime, we mentioned Erik Karlsson, and we are going to talk about Pittsburgh and Toronto, who both made significant changes, coming up next.
First, though, we're going to tell you all about FanDuel, because football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. All you have to do is pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and every time they win in the regular season, you are going to get bonus bets, which you can use on spreads, player props, over-unders, more. You can even bet on the NHL or the MLB. The World Series is coming up soon, so if you want to put some money on that, you can do it at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon.
All right, getting back into our discussion on teams that are going to look a lot different this upcoming season and where we think it will get them. And I think it's really difficult to have this conversation without lumping Toronto and Pittsburgh into the same discussion, right? And it's obvious because of Kyle Dubas leaving Toronto and going to Pittsburgh with a lot to prove, I think, on that front, and wanting to make a big splash. But he's a guy that's going to make the right splash, right? I think he is very deliberate in the moves he makes, and he has a very limited time window to work with in terms of the core of the Pens, with Crosby and Malkin and Letang kind of maybe only having 2 years left, right, to make things happen. And so getting Karlsson, I think, goes a long way. But they also jettisoned a bunch of players too that I think, go back to the Hextall era of the team and getting rid of some of those big contracts and brought in some other key pieces. So Jason Zucker's out, Kulikov's out, Dumoulin's gone, Bonino's gone, Ryan Paling's gone. But then they bring in Riley Smith and Ryan Graves and Lars Eller, who I think that's actually a really great addition to this Pittsburgh team, right?
Yeah, exactly. The thing about Pittsburgh is that they have that 1-2 punch down the center. So anything else that they bring in at forward is really just kind of a bonus. Lars Eller is going to be an excellent 3C for this team. I like the Karlsson trade for the Penguins. They jettisoned a couple of bad contracts. They didn't give up a ton. That first round pick is obviously the piece of the trade for the Sharks, and the fact that they don't have to pay Erik Karlsson $11.5 million for the next 2 seasons. I don't know that I would have made that trade because it feels a little bit like kind of what the Capitals are doing at the minute, where they're just kind of kicking the can down the road to keep building the team around Ovechkin, and so Ovechkin can hit that goals record. The Penguins, obviously, they have limited time left. Malkin is 37, I believe. Letang is 36. Crosby is 35. They're at the end of the road, NHL speaking. I know we keep talking about them like they're basically on death's door. He's 35 years old. It's
younger than me. They're both younger than me. So,
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, they're doing okay. But
yeah,
it feels like they've added Erik Karlsson to win a cup. And I don't know that Erik Karlsson turns this roster into a cup contender. I think what's probably going to happen is they'll probably win a couple of rounds and then just bow out as gracefully as you want. But
yeah,
it's
going to be real interesting because I think Karlsson had an outlier season this past year.
For sure.
And so it's now, I think there's more around him in Pittsburgh than there was in San Jose. So I think, that'll balance itself out.
Oh yeah, he's still going to be a 70 to 80 point player, I think.
Yeah.
He's not going to get 100 points again.
No. No.
but he's still going to be
So,
very good for them.
but he won't need to, and that's the
Exactly.
upside of it. So I think that's fine. I just think it's yeah, I think they're going to run into like the brick wall that is the other teams in the East eventually.
Mhm.
That they just have a ceiling that they're not going to be able to go above, and it's unfortunate for them. But I think Duas has done everything that he can to get him there. His old team, the Toronto Maple Leafs, I think are in a little bit of desperation mode. So this is a team that's making lots of big changes in a scrambly way, I would say. I'm not saying it's not totally smart moves, but I think it's reactionary moves, to be fair. So, Bertuzzi is in, John Klingberg, which was a late addition. So, read into that what you will,
Mhm.
but Max Domi, Ryan Reeves, and then they had to sacrifice Michael Bunting and all this because there's just no space for him. Ryan O'Reilly's gone. They got rid of some depth pieces that were helpful to them in Luke Shen and Eric Gustafson. I think that they're going to have a tougher time scoring goals this season beyond the top lines, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like the Bertuzzi signing, I like a lot. They're going to
Mhm.
staple him to Matthews and Marner, and he's probably going to put up,
Sure.
30 goals this season, and then he's
It's
going to
the
sign
Letang
hugely
effect, right?
next season.
Yeah.
Beyond that, Nylander is still a very good piece. Will he be a Leaf by the end of next season? We don't know. He's the one that I think is most likely to be moved if they have to move one of them. Tavares is getting older. Max Domi is apparently an upgrade on Alexander Kerfoot. I don't see it. Ryan Reeves is an upgrade on Wayne Simmons, the same way that an old car that is not on fire is better than an old car that is on fire. It's I don't know. I see a lot of people saying that the Leafs got better this offseason. I think they just kind of made a bunch of lateral moves in the
Yeah.
hope that the Stars can get it done this time with different supporting cast. I don't see anyone outside of Bertuzzi. I don't see anyone that they've added this season that is going to be a real difference maker for this team in a
Yeah.
positive way.
Yeah. So I feel like, it's a lot of pieces moved around on the board, but in the end
Mhm.
result, the board looks almost the same as it did.
Essentially, yeah. Which maybe that's the way to do it. If you've got players like Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, William Nylander, like arguably Morgan Riley on the back end, like John Tavares can still kind of get it done, but for how much longer? Maybe you do just kind of build around that and keep swapping the pieces in and out. But yeah, it feels very much like this is a tough first season for Brad Treliving to walk into. I think there's a lot of big
Yeah.
contracts that need signing next off season. And yeah, it does feel like it's going to be a boom or bust season for the Leafs. They won a series. They won a series this season. Can they do it again next season? Can they win two? Who can say?
Yeah, I think there will be a lot of comparisons between these two teams this upcoming season for sure. We will keep an eye on them as well as the rest of the goings on around the league. In the meantime, we have our biweekly women's hockey spotlight with Erica Ayala. She's going to talk about some hints to what the new league could look like and what's been going on at the Harvard women's program coming up next.
Hey, hockey fans, welcome to another segment of the Women's Hockey Spotlight on Locked On NHL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Erica Ayala. In addition to being your host of the Women's Hockey Spotlight segment bi-weekly, I am also the host of Locked On Kraken. But today we are going to talk about women's hockey, and we've been talking for the last couple of women's hockey spotlights about the forthcoming Women's Hockey League. And while we still don't have a lot of updates, we did get a little bit of a hint that things are moving forward. Maybe some of those breadcrumbs that we've talked about from an interesting source, the Ontario Hockey League. the Peterborough Petes made an announcement. Burton Lee has accepted a position with the new Professional Women's Hockey League. This announcement came on August 9th. So the executive director of business operations, Burton Lee, has accepted a position as director of game operations and fan experience within the hockey operations department of the new Professional Women's Hockey League that will begin play January of 2024. I am extremely grateful to the Pete's board of directors and to our hockey and business staff for the opportunity to have worked with the historic Pete's organization for the past decade. That is what Burton says in the press release. He goes on to say, I am looking forward to contributing to one of the most exciting projects in the sports industry, working alongside a renowned ownership and executive team to establish the new Professional Women's Hockey League. The Mark Walter Group and Billie Jean King Enterprises have initiated something truly special for the hockey world. I am excited to work alongside a team led by Jana Hefford and to use the knowledge and experience I've gained in Peterborough to help fans across North America and around the world experience elite hockey in a new way. Now, Burton Lee, at least from the press release and from doing a little bit of recon, doesn't have specific women's hockey experience, but again, has been an executive director in the OHL. I do also think it's interesting and maybe a little bit telling that one of the first hires, at least that has been made public, is for a position that is going to focus on the fan experience. Now, if you've been listening to the Women's Hockey Spotlight or even some of my women's hockey coverage elsewhere, I think you probably get the gist that there's a lot of questions at minimum and uncertainty. Fans are very confused, and some, quite honestly, are very hurt by the way the acquisition of the Premier Hockey Federation went down. Not to mention that we have a very short runway to get this league going by January 2024, which again is in this press release. So that's about all the news we have about the new Women's Hockey League, but at least we're starting to see hires. Those little breadcrumbs are dropping, and so hopefully we'll get a few more hints and clues as to what is to come in January. Now we're going to switch over to college hockey, and we're going to go to Harvard Women's Ice Hockey, who hired one of their own as their new head coach. Now, for those who don't know, there's a little bit of controversy with women's hockey at Harvard, but we'll get to that in a minute. First, let's talk about Bellamy, who played at Harvard, originally from Minnesota, coached at Duluth, and also started her coaching career at Harvard. Laura Bellamy, who graduated in the class of 2013, will be back to lead Harvard's women's ice hockey. The director of athletics, Erin McDermott, had this to say about Laura. Laura brings a deep commitment to coaching and mentoring student athletes, excelling on the ice, in the classroom, and engaged in the community. We look forward to watching her coach in the rink. That meant so much to her as a player. Now, on the one hand, it's always great to bring someone back that understands the program, that has benefited from the legacy and the historic program that is Harvard Women's Ice Hockey. But now we have to go to the controversy. For those who maybe don't know, Katie Stone was the head coach at Harvard's Women's Ice Hockey for 3 decades, and she retired earlier this year. But the retirement came after multiple reports, particularly from the Boston Globe and The Athletic, that there was a long culture and history of hazing, of bullying, and some of it racially charged, not to mention a little bit, I don't want to say explicit, but sexual perhaps in its nature. Now, Harvard Women's Ice Hockey did hire Jenner and Block, and hockey fans, you might recognize the name Jenner and Block because they are the law firm that also did the third-party investigation on the Chicago Blackhawks because of the accusations brought to the team by who we now know to be Kyle Beach. The Athletic reported that the findings of the report from Jenner and Block made clear that, quote, some traditions in recent years were experienced differently by different people, and not all were comfortable with those activities or with expressing concerns related to the program. After the investigation, in an email that the Athletic was able to require, Erin McDermott, the director of athletics at Harvard, wrote, quote, our current women's ice hockey team has not fostered a culture of hazing. However, the email goes on to say, and it has been reported other places in addition to the Athletic, that Harvard is going to be changing some of its traditions. Now, again, if you look at some of the allegations for Harvard, some of them can be difficult, and I just want to give a small trigger warning. But one that really stood out to me as completely ridiculous, in that I can't believe it was ever a tradition, was something called a naked skate. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but also apparently with these naked skates, there was something known, or players were expected to do a Superman on the ice. If you think of the Superman pose, and if you think of being essentially completely nude on the ice, your body then sliding along the ice completely naked. I don't know why anyone would do that personally. I just don't like cold, so that's not something that I would ever do. But also, to make that a part of a culture of an ice hockey team seems a little bit ridiculous. And there are all kinds of traditions. Some do include getting absolutely naked. However, what was really telling for me about these naked skates, air quotes, is that after the initial Boston Globe article regarding the accusations and the allegations brought forth about Stone and the women's program at Harvard, there was a naked skate. The last reported naked skate at Harvard women's ice hockey program came under Stone's tenure the day after the Boston Globe article was released. And to me, that doesn't sound like a tradition that is meant to build the culture of a team, but is perhaps more a punishment. It seemed more like a punishment than anything. So while it's, again, always great to have someone return to the program, I think it's fair to ask questions. If having someone who not only played at Harvard, but also coached at Harvard, both under Stone, if Harvard wants to move away from certain air quotes traditions and have a more positive culture, even though, according to Harvard, the report and investigation says there is not a problem of culture, is that the right move? Is that giving any assurance to people who did have problems what happened at Harvard over Stone's 30 years? Any assurances that things will change? These are questions that I think Harvard is going to have to answer. I also think that they need to release the full report. We haven't seen the full report. And so all of this coming from an email that the Athletic acquired, and again, other outlets have reported on it, but I don't think Harvard's doing the hard work here, at least not right now, of transparency. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see, not only about how Harvard moves forward and hopefully is ushering in a more positive and, quite honestly, professional culture, but we'll have to see what more, if we get any more breadcrumbs about the new Women's Hockey League. Thanks so much for listening to the Women's Hockey Spotlight, and I'll catch you in another 2 weeks.
All right. Once again, thanks to Erica Ayala for our Women's Hockey Spotlight. That will do it for the Friday show here at Locked On NHL. We'll be back on Monday looking at teams from around the league and their off seasons. Once again, I am Rachel Donner, been here with Jay Forster. Have a great weekend, everybody.